I recall, that was hired for $200,000 a year. Are those accurate figures? Or the people that were laid off around the 1st of September of 2011?
There were individuals that were laid off during that time in the vertical infrastructure or in the construction area.
Yes.
There was also an individual impacted in the capital complex maintenance area.
Well, and in looking at Mr. Carlson, looking at your sheet here, as I understand the people that were out, there are 12 of them. Would that be the same 12 as the 4 employees we're talking about that were laid off about that time?
I believe at the time of the reorganization, there were 12 employees.
Okay, about the first part of September 2011. Okay, and then you hired back, according to the employees, you hired back 3, plus, as I recall, the figure $200,000 a year to a private company. Is that correct? Under your new program, is that who you hired back then?
No, sir, not in the construction area. We did seek engineering consultancy from an organization through an RFP process to assist us in identifying infrastructure needs here on the capital complex, on this actual capital complex, not statewide, but just here.
And would that cost have been around $200,000?
I don't have the exact figure from me, but I believe it was in the $180,000 a year range.
Okay.
And that was to hire a company with tremendous skill sets and a large staff to assist us.
Well, so that's close anyway. So that seems to me to be consistent with Mr. Carlson, with your figures here. And it does look like then you would have had substantial savings. Is that what you're trying to get at with your sheet here?
That's a correct statement.
Okay, and did you lose, what's been your experience since September of 2011 in terms of all these projects that you're working on? Have you suffered because you lost these 12 people and you didn't hire them back nearly that many? How are things going?
Purely from a business aspect, the layoff of individuals was very difficult, remains to be.
Yes.
It's a difficult situation that no one likes to experience, especially from a management perspective. From a business perspective, and the way that we're serving as taxpayers of Iowa, we've had tremendous success. Our reduction of change orders has been significant. Our exposure to litigation has been non-existent since our new methodology took place. We have approximately $15.9 million of savings in our projects. And I think there's often lots of conversation about pure money savings, and we certainly did that strategic analysis before we would have ever instituted a new methodology, but we're also delivering more quality projects. And that is as important as particular dollar savings now, because we're building buildings that will last our state 50, 75, and 100 years and have lower cost of ownership over time. So we can certainly talk about the numbers that we're experiencing now, but always want to make sure that we're emphasizing the quality of projects that we're producing in addition to the immediate savings to taxpayers.
Well, thank you very much. I think you make a good point. We're all concerned about the employees that were laid off, and I guess if you look at this whole controversy here, 90% of it has focused on the fact that some employees lost their job, and we sympathize with that. But on the other hand, from the taxpayer's point of view, it looks like the taxpayers came out way ahead from what you're telling us, and I haven't seen anybody contradicting that. So I guess it just depends on whose point of view you're looking at it from as to whether this was a successful change in methodology or not. Would that be your opinion?
It would be. I think as Senator McCoy made reference to earlier, we're always paid to make difficult decisions, and that's why it's called work. And this was certainly, we were certainly forced with very difficult decisions here, and it troubles me, and I say this with absolute sincerity, it troubles me that that there tends to be a belief at times that we did not take that seriously, and that that was not a very difficult time. It was, but from a business standpoint, to better serve taxpayers in a $427 million portfolio, which is a tremendously large portfolio by any standards nationwide, we're doing the best that we could to produce better projects.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Representative Murphy.
Yeah, I was just going to start, I'm going to do some follow-up first on some of the, I'm sorry. I'm going to just do a follow-up on some of the previous questions. When you talked about the Iowa Veterans Home and you were receiving federal dollars, did we follow Davis-Bacon wage standards for that?
I'm assuming that we did. I wasn't directly managing any of those projects. I could certainly pull files and wage files, but I'm certain that we were following every letter of the law.
Could you bring that to the committee then so we could check it?
I'd be happy to produce that, yes, sir.
Okay. The second question I had was, I know several people have asked the question of master builders, and they just say is master builders is involved. I'm going to ask a different question, which is there any individuals or companies that are members of master builders that were part of any of the process that was asked in the previous questions? You said master builders isn't, but I was wanting to know if they had individual members or if there were groups that were associated with them or officers within that organization that were involved in that process.
Yes, sir. We've discussed a multitude of processes and projects here today, and quite frankly, many of those are blurring together for me. I'm not always certain where we're coming from with that, so if you could more clearly...
Well, I think some of
define
the questions that I think Senator McCoy and Senator Peterson asked was, I think one of them was you created a new committee that was called the, let me check it here. It was called, you had an infrastructure work group.
Yes, sir. That was a working group to respond to the need that there would be a potential large amount of state funds go into infrastructure, and so there was a working group that was formed to take a look at what our infrastructure needs were and to make recommendations. Therefore, representatives of that, I believe, were representing MBI, and I believe were representing the trades.
Okay.
I sat on that.
Because I think the earlier question, they were said that they were, neither one were involved, and now you're saying they both were involved in that work group, correct?
Earlier, we were speaking about a couple of different things simultaneously, I believe. One was how we currently look at infrastructure dollars and the individuals that make that on a regular basis. This infrastructure working group was a one-time group or a group that met a series of times and was established for the purpose of this legislative session, is my understanding.
Okay. The next question I had was, and I guess this goes to, well, I guess it goes to both of these. On the issue of terminations, when you terminated the employees and they were walked out, and I know they took different amounts of time depending on how much personal items they had. The issue has been brought up that we have blacklisting. Were any of these people put on any lists that does not rehire that you're aware of?
No.
Not that you're aware of.
No, they were not terminated for cause. They were laid off.
Okay, and would you agree with that?
I would.
Mr. Woodley?
There were no terminations. It was a layoff, a structured layoff.
A structured layoff?
It was.
Okay.
And I'm not certain if those are in how to designate.
Did these structured layoffs then get unemployment?
I believe that they did, yes, sir.
I think they were entitled.
Okay. And as far as you're aware, they did apply for unemployment like any other person would that lost their job because they weren't terminated but because they were a structured layoff?
I don't know who applied for unemployment compensation, but I believe, to the best of my knowledge, they certainly were entitled to it if they had applied.
Okay. And did the state contest those cases?
To my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay. Do you knowledge, Paul, or Mr. Carlson, did you?
No, I don't believe any unemployment was contested.
Okay, so they would have been able to receive it without going through any process of trying to prove that they would still be eligible for unemployment.
I don't know what the process is. There's an application process, and I believe if...
And an employer can challenge them if they choose to, and I'm just wondering if either one of you...
To the best of my knowledge, we did not challenge them.
Okay, and none of these people received secret settlement agreements?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
And Mr. Carlson?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. The other question I have for Mr. Carlson, Mr. Carlson, was you mentioned that you worked on from August to October of 2011 when Senator Griner asked the question on preparing this document here. And you have your new position that is the Chief Resource Maximization Officer for the Department of Administrative Services. So were you working on this as the Chief Resource Maximization Officer, or what role were you working on that prior to 2012?
I was working on it as a staff person in the design and construction.
Okay, and then you were moved into the other position after this was developed?
After the adoption of the new business model was put in place, then I am no longer working in that area.
Okay. The other part that I had a question with too was Mr. Woodley did answer, I forget who asked the question of who was involved in the preparation meetings prior to meeting with this committee the last time. And the names that were mentioned were Jimmy Centers, Brenna Finley, and Matt Hinch. I guess the question I have for Mr. Carlson is, were you involved in any preparation meetings, and who was in those meetings? Because I don't think you answered that question.
I was in the same meetings.
You were in the same meetings. Would you agree that the same people were in the meetings? Okay. And then just two more questions. I guess that just to briefly talk about the request for proposal versus a request for bid. When do you make a determination that you put a request for bid versus a request for proposal out? I assume a bid is done with the idea of seeing how expensive a process will be versus a request for proposal, which is supposed to be sort of like the real thing, or am I wrong?
It depends on the actual situation. Typically, a bid would be issued for an actual a good. And for services, it's typically a proposal. Law indicates that services do not have to be selected solely on price, but on ability to perform the task.
Okay. And you were talking about RFP versus an RFB with Senator Peterson. I guess the question I have for you is, for the proposals that you were doing that were requiring construction projects, I assume you were doing RFPs then and not RFBs.
They would have been RFPs, yes. A proposal, because that would have been a service, and so we wouldn't have been making selections solely on low price or low cost.
Okay. And then just to go back briefly to what Senator Garrett talked, or maybe it was Senator St. John, about the operating budget. And to find out where the dollars came from, because I'm thinking that most of your dollars are appropriated by the legislature, or you receive federal dollars for some of your projects that are building projects, whether it's a veterans home, or because we get federal dollars commingled with ours. I guess I have several questions. Do you know if there were federal dollars involved with any of these funds where we did do settlement payments with state employees?
To my knowledge, there would not have been any federal funds used with that, but I wouldn't have any knowledge of that.
Mr. Carlson?
I have the same response. I don't know. I was not involved with that part of this process.
Okay. And just to go back briefly on this list, we'll save that for another time. I would just like to make a motion now before the committee before we do anything else, and that would be to do two things. I think the first one is to contact all state agencies, contact them to see if there have been settlement agreements that there's a confidentiality provision. If there is, to ask them to submit data through the Freedom of Information Act with the purpose of being able to give them the time to redact the information, Plus, it doesn't require anybody from the private sector to pay to get disclosure, and I think we're doing that disclosure by doing that. So I would like to make that motion right now before the committee. And I don't know if people want to debate it or not, but I just want to make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Is there discussion?
Yes. Could we add that to House File 2462? Could we get that past the Senate? Is there any way to add that to?
You want to add that to his motion?
Yes.
I assume he's not going to be agreeable to that.
Why wouldn't he?
All right, is there any other discussion on the
Representative
motion?
Boswell, have we been able to ever get the Senate to do anything we wanted them to do?
All right, let's take a vote on the motion. All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, we're discussion, yes.
Representative Murphy, what kind of time frame are you talking about? I would hope that you wouldn't make this into a purely partisan thing and we could go back, say, to 1999 and cover several administrations so it doesn't look like just a partisan point.
If there's secret settlement agreements with, the only stipulation I would have is secret settlement agreement with the fact that there was something paid in order to keep a person quiet, I think I can accept that.
Well, now, how are you going to know that? Most of the settlement agreements I've seen just have a flat amount for a settlement agreement. They don't say X dollars for a confidentiality agreement. I don't know if any of them say that. So normally, the records are just going to have a flat amount for confidentiality agreement.
And Senator Garrett, it's my understanding that most settlement agreements with the state usually involve your vacation time or other time that you accrued, and that if a person was asked to leave state government and there was a confidentiality provision, that would be put in there. And that's what we're asking for. So, I mean, if you want to go back to 1999, I'm fine with that. It's just that if you want that kind of disclosure, I'm fine with that.
Well, but your disclosure is, I want to make sure that everybody knows what your disclosure is. Is it the fact that there's a confidentiality clause in the agreement, or are you limited to trying to, okay, all right. So it doesn't matter that the agreement itself doesn't enumerate what the payment's for. It's just, it's a settlement agreement. There's X dollars given in order to settle it, and there's a confidentiality agreement in the settlement agreement. That's what we're looking for.
Well, the big part is, the money that has to be paid for that settlement agreement to keep it quiet for the employee.
You're really asking a very, maybe impossible, or at least very difficult question. If you have to try to determine whether there was specific money paid for the confidentiality agreement. There's going to be, I don't know that I've seen a one that say that. They just have an amount that's agreed to, and there's a settlement agreement. It doesn't say X dollars for the settlement.
Well, Senator Garrett, I assume we're here because that is the discussion we've been having about settlement agreements that are confidential. And so that's the point I'm trying to make here. If we do have these type of settlement agreements that are confidential, that are merit employees that were asked to leave, and then we're given a settlement agreement not to talk, those are the ones that we're talking about.
Well, now you said something different there.
Oh, I don't think I have.
Well, I want to be clear.
Point of
Madam
information.
Chairman,
Point of information. Representative Murphy, would you please restate your motion originally?
Yes, my motion is for the Oversight Committee to request information from all state agencies, to request information on secret settlement agreements where there's a confidentiality provision proposed that are merit employees that were asked to leave state government.
And I've seconded that motion, and it is debatable, but I'm just trying to understand what we're talking about.
We're in agreement that we should go back to 1999, that's fine with you, you said?
If you want to go back to when the building was built, I'm fine with that.
All right.
Although I think you'll have to dig through lots of paper, Paul.
So it's